first, that was a wonderful, wonderful introduction. I'm biased, as you can imagine, but I echo everything that was said. I think we do owe a debt of gratitude to the entire referendum party team, which I think pulled off against the odds something of a miracle. It was an extraordinary process. It was my first taste of political campaigning, and I'm still held in something close to contempt by some of the Conservative associations in neighbouring constituencies to Richmond, where they never ceased to remind me that I was knocking on the door with a different coloured rosette and campaigning for something quite different. But the truth is the Conservative Party then was not a Conservative party. I don't believe a Conservative party could have legitimately pursued the policies that were being pursued at the time. I think the referendum party was a genuine Conservative party at the time. Look, I'm going to apologise also for being late. We were voting, we couldn't get out. As politicians have a very bad reputation when it comes to timekeeping. A number of constituents here who will nod their head if they were feeling unkind and tell you that the same happens in the constituency of public meetings. I'm going to apologise also for the brilliant Kate Hoey. I honestly think one of the greatest parliamentarians we have, really for a generation, superb, heroic figure. But when I asked her, do you want to lift to the meeting after the vote, her eyes went blank. She said, what meeting? This is what happens in Parliament, I'm afraid. I said, well, we have got a little matter. I called it a debate. I hadn't seen that we were giving lectures. I'm a bit disappointed. Nevertheless, I'm slightly more prepared than Kate. It was in July. But nevertheless, she doesn't need much preparation. This is her bread and butter. She knows her stuff. Has been campaigning heroically on these issues for a very long time, as you know. But despite the mess that we're seeing throughout Europe at the moment, the crisis affecting the Eurozone, that's not what I'm going to talk about. Because for me, the biggest single reason to be Eurosceptic, the single biggest reason to campaign for initially a referendum, followed by an out vote, whether that's yes or no, depends how it's phrased, comes down to democracy. And I don't want to repeat too much of what's been said. There are so many reasons to be Eurosceptic, but this really has to be the central issue. The simple fact, which I think is so often overlooked, is that 17,000 laws in this country have come from the European Union. And even the House of Commons Library, not Eurosceptic organisation, estimates that more than half of the laws in this country now are imported from or imposed on us by the European Union. And in some departments of government, it is much, much, much worse. I take a particular interest in DEFRA, Department of Environment, Food, Farming and Rural Affairs, a nightmare organisation at the best of times, a nightmare organisation now. But 80% of the laws coming through DEFRA are not of DEFRA origin. They're imposed on DEFRA by the European Union. And whereas every department of government has a shadow of backbenchers in a select committee whose job is to scrutinise the laws that come out of those departments, there is no scrutiny committee. There is no mechanism for scrutinising the laws that come from the European Union. There is one European Union committee, I forget what it's called. It is possibly the European Scrutiny Committee. But its job is really to look at some of the broader issues. It's run by Bill Cash. He's been heroic for many years, as you know. But his job is to look at the relationship between Britain and Europe, and to question some of the impositions on the basis of whether or not they impact on our sovereignty. But those individual laws that come pouring in like confetti, they come in absolutely unchallenged. And in DEFRA, that's a particular problem. I think it matters because there is, even overlooking the omission or the lack of select committees, there is no other mechanism at all whereby we can scrutinise those laws. Certainly the British public can't. You have no say at all. Even your representatives, and I can say this having been an MP for a year, we have absolutely no mechanism for scrutinising those laws. And you can argue forever about whether one of those laws is good or bad and another one's good or bad. And obviously there are some good laws and there are some bad laws. But the process is fundamentally undemocratic. And not just a little bit, to quote, who was it, Paul Daniels, not a little bit. It is totally undemocratic. And I'm going to give you a few examples, current examples. Tomorrow in Parliament, there will be a debate on what is seemingly a very, very marginal issue related to whether or not Britain should ban the use of wild animals concerns. And in reality, this is a secret that the animal rights people won't say, there's only about 30 animals, so this is not a big animal rights issue. I mean, it really isn't. But what is of interest, and why this is a relevant issue, in my view, is that a month ago the government announced, more or less announced, in this way, in as much as governments do announce things, before decisions are actually taken, that they were going to support this, that they were going to ban the use of wild animals in circuses. And they were going to do it because there was overwhelming support for a ban. 96% of the people polled in the recent poll said they wanted a ban. Pretty much everyone responded to the consultation, more than 96% said they wanted a ban, and the government responded accordingly. Then they did a U-turn, and they did a U-turn on the basis that they're worried about a legal challenge. And I accept that I'm mixing issues of European Union, human rights, and so on, but as far as I'm concerned, we need to regard these as the same issue. This is about the yielding of sovereignty. Now, on the back of a possible legal challenge, possible future legal challenge, under no one seems to be able to understand or explain what it is the challenge, nature of the challenge would take. But just the threat, the possibility, even in the absence of an active threat, the government has backed down. And as a result, tomorrow we're in a shameful situation where the British government is going to have to admit that it does not think it has the power even to take this one very minor step. So my question, and I will ask this in Parliament tomorrow, and I will encourage everyone on the backbenches to vote against the government and give it a bloody nose, if only to remind people that Parliament exists for a reason. And I'll ask the government at the time, what is the point of getting people worked up before a general election, promising this and promising that, if you can't even ban wild animals in circuses? There are already 30 of them. Instead, they're going to have to build up an entire regulatory regime, which will cost God knows how much, inspection regimes and vets going to circuses and so on, and create something totally artificial because they don't have the courage or the strength or the independence to be able to take these decisions. So tomorrow, today, I was in a select committee. I was speaking for longer than I said, but I apologize. Today I was in a select committee where we had farming experts. We had the National Farmers Union, we had the Food and Drinks Federation, we had DEFRA officials, and I was asking them all pretty much all the same question. How is it possible for our farmers to survive, let alone be competitive, to survive in conditions where we don't have an even playing field, where we impose very cumbersome laws on them, some of them good, some of them as a response of consumer pressure. We don't like keeping pigs in little crates, we don't like chickens being kept in appalling conditions, and we impose higher and higher standards on them. But what we're effectively doing is we're exporting cruelty abroad, because we have no mechanism at all for saying that if these are the laws we impose on our farmers, we like to make sure that whatever we import meets the same standards. The reason we can't do that, and the reason, despite a pre-election promise from our Prime Minister, the reason they won't do anything about this, the reason we won't create a fair and even playing field so that our farmers can survive and our food security is maintained, is because of a fear and legal challenge. Again, there's just simply not enough will, in my view, at the highest levels to do what is right. That was today. A month ago, I'll give you one last example. A month ago, we had a debate in Parliament on reform of the Common Fisheries Policy, which is probably the worst piece of environmental policy in the history of environmental policy, and for all the obvious reasons. Well, one of the reasons is that it requires us, because of these crazy quota laws, to chuck away half the fish that are caught, either dead or dying. At a time of food insecurity and rising food prices, as a time of increased concern for conservation, it just simply makes no sense at all. Well, one of the ways in which I believe that we would be able to resolve this issue is by reasserting our control over the 12 miles that surround our coast. And the reason we need to do this, well, there are many reasons, but one of the key reasons we need to do this is to create an even playing field. So we already have laws in this country imposed on our fishermen in the name of conservation, some of them very sensible. We banned, for example, trawling, pair trawling for sea bass around the southwest coast. And we did this because dolphins and porpoises were being hammered, and consumers and the public and people were rightly alarmed by this. And the fishermen said, okay, we'll do it, but you watch what happens. And we watched, and the very next, literally the very next day, Spanish and French trawlers came in, and they trawled for sea bass, pair trawled for sea bass. And to hell with the dolphins, to hell with the porpoises, and to hell with our fishermen. And the effect is we have a completely unfair situation where we can impose any number of laws on our fishermen, but they simply do not apply to anyone from other countries. And again, this was put to a motion, put to a vote, in fact, in Parliament a month ago. And because of the pressure from a really gratifying number of backbenchers, support from the Labour Party, but also a very healthy number of backbenchers from the Conservative Party, and even one or two Liberal Democrats, believe it or not. And they let the Minister and the Prime Minister know that whatever the position the government took, they would back this motion. As a result, this motion has gone through unopposed. And we'll have to see now. The government is required, has been told by Parliament in no uncertain terms that it needs to reject any reforms of the CFP unless it includes sovereignty over those 12 miles. We'll see in September. My hunch is that the government won't do it. One, because it will require too much of a fight. And that's our job as Parliament. It's the job of the backbenchers to make sure that they keep to what Parliament has instructed. constructed. But these are just three recent examples, and I said I wasn't going to go on. But my view is that the European Union, in all its guises, effectively makes, on so many different levels, common sense into a crime. And for too often, the British government has allowed common sense to yield. My view is that the law should yield. We should challenge the law. And the only way we're going to do that, I have absolutely no belief at all that we can reform the European Union as it currently stands. I don't believe bureaucracies ever willingly shrink. I don't think we'll ever be able to pull back power. I don't think we're going to be able to stop prisoners voting. I don't think we're going to reclaim sovereignty of our land. I don't believe we're going to be able to ban circus, wild animals in circus. I don't believe we're going to be able to do any of these things, because bureaucracies never willingly shrink. And because the decision makers at the level of the European Union are completely, wholly insulated from any kind of real democratic pressure. There's no pressure on them to yield or to cede power back to individual countries. So as far as I'm concerned, the only answer we have, even though I believe in a European Union, nothing like the one we have at the moment, I believe in a European Union to deal with European issues. Despite that, I believe the only answer is for the British people to demand withdrawal altogether. And at that point, we'd be able to decide on what terms we want to do business with the European Union. And we would be able to. We would be, just as other members of the EFTA, with the 4 countries are able to pick and choose. They're able to decide on what basis they do business with Europe. China is able to decide on what basis it does business with Europe. And yet somehow we are supposed to believe that if we withdraw from the European Union, we will shrivel up and die. And it is nonsense, absolutely nonsense. As far as I'm concerned, that is the only step that we can now realistically take if we want to restore anything, any kind of sovereignty in this country. And that requires Parliament to stand up. And like David, this is my last point, I believe the Parliament is in a position now, is in a place now, where this is a very real possibility. It's a possibility for a number of reasons. I think the Labour Party will at some point decide that it backs, in the life of this Parliament, that it backs an in or out referendum. I think they'll probably do it for mischievous reasons, but they'll do it, in my view. And if that happens, it's only a matter of mathematics. You only need 44, 45 coalition MPs who are committed at that point to voting, assuming total discipline in the Labour Party. You are, in order to ensure that Parliament passes this, whatever is needed in order for this referendum to happen. And I can tell you that there is close to that number, possibly that number, maybe even more than that number, coalition MPs, I should say conservative MPs, because I haven't met individuals yet who are willing to do this, who will vote for a referendum. And there is a group that's been established. We're talking about strange bedfellows. I've set up an organisation of Keith Vaz, of all people. And this is, I know these things happen, it's a strange thing, politics. But it's called the In or Out Group, and we already have 60 members signed up. And these are people who are committed, absolutely committed, who are given an opportunity to vote for a referendum. And that number is growing, and it's growing very fast, and it's being held. And one of the reasons it's growing is because we have an extraordinary organisation, a campaign called People's Pledge, which I'm sure many of you are members of or have heard of. It is worth looking on the internet and backing that organisation, because it exists for one purpose now, and that is to get people to apply pressure to their MPs to ensure that those MPs join this group and make that pledge. It's a really important organisation, and I would say that is the organisation that really needs a lot of support. There are a couple of people here I can see from the People's Pledge, so I get brownie points for plugging it. But it is a really important organisation, it's worth backing. I'm going to stop there. Thank you very much.